Life and Adventures of Jack Engle, an Autobiography, in which the reader will find some familiar characters. By Walt Whitman. Read by Frank Blissett. Chapter 4. Whatever seeds of evil and degradation my life in the streets had infused in my character before I took up my abode with Ephraim Foster, had no chance to grow afterward. Both his wife and himself treated me like a son, and better than many people treat their sons. Kindness choked out all lingering tendencies to mischief within me, and the sentiment which just flickered a moment in my mind when we were in the basement of the Quaker lady's house, here grew into form and permanence, and I loved that rough husk of a fellow with a love which was only overtopped by my affection for my dear mother, as I always call her, his wife Violet. Violet, that was the name of one for whom I bear a sentiment imperishable until my heart perishes. Let me describe her. This woman, with the name of a frail and humble flower, had the bodily height and breadth of a good-sized man. She was a country girl when Ephraim married her, and loved to work outdoors. Her features were coarse, only her complexion was clean and healthy, and her eyes beamed with perpetual cheerfulness and willingness to oblige. She had little education and what is called in the hothouse taste of the present day intellect. She had no more idea of what are now called woman's rights than of the sublimest wonders of geology. But she had a beautiful soul, and her coarse, big features were lighted up with more sweetness to me than any Madonna of Italian masters. With the strength of a horse, Violet possessed the gentleness of a dove. How sweetly tasted the first food she prepared for me! How fresh and fragrant the homely clothes I was given to put on that morning, after a bath in a big tub in the wood-house! And how kindly the tone in which I was reminded of observances about the place that day! For Violet was a critical housekeeper, and dirt was an abomination in her eyes. Patient, considerate, self-denying mother! Blessed is the home, blessed are the children where such as you are found. Nearly 10 years of my life were here passed, smoothly and happily. A great portion of the last 6 was spent at school, although I often wished to stop that and undertake some trade or employment, but my parents would not have it so. They prospered fairly, and said that they made a decent living enough now, and it would perhaps be my turn by and by when they grew old. Ephraim had his mind set on my following the profession of the law. I did not steadily oppose him in this, after I found out it was a darling notion, but the truth was, it by no means agreed with my own fancy. The brightest jewel, saith the Persian poet, that glitters on the neck of a young man is the spirit of adventure. I felt this spirit within me, but I repressed it and made it dumb, for I regarded their feeling who had lifted me into life, worthy to be so called. You already know of my introduction to the lawyer Covert. I went the next day according to appointment and made a beginning. This consisted simply in my master's giving me an outline of the course of primary reading for a law student, and in my getting familiar with the office, just to take the rawness off. I was much amused with Nathaniel, the office boy, and felt a sincere pity for old Wigglesworth. And before the morning passed away, we three were on very good terms together. Nat was pert enough, but he had a fund of real wit of which he was sufficiently lavish, in season and out of season. He saluted me with gravity as Don Cesar de Bazan, from a resemblance he assumed to discover between myself and the player of that part at the theatre which Nathaniel was in the habit of honoring with an occasional shilling and his presence. And Don Cesar he persisted in calling me from that time. "Let not my lord forget that the banquet waits," said this precocious youth with a droll obeisance. It was 12:30, and I was to treat to a cheap dinner that day, in commemoration of the important era of my career. We knew that Mr. Covert had an appointment to meet some clients at this time, and, as Wigglesworth told me very often happened, he signified his wish for a clear kitchen. The parties just anticipated our departure. 2 ladies came in a carriage, which we saw at the door. A big black driver, dressed in a cape surtout, seated on the box. These ladies, this Wigglesworth also told me in the street, were the wealthy Madame Selini and her daughter. Madame was fat enough and red enough, had a hooked nose and keen black eyes. Her person glistened and rustled with jewelry and silks, diffusing a strong scent of musk with every movement. She had a yellow silk bonnet set back on her head, and her fat hands, gloved in white kid, applied a perfumed handkerchief of costly lace to the before-mentioned nose. She waddled rather than walked, and sank down panting in the great chair which Mr. Covert had placed for her. Rebecca, the daughter, offered metal more attractive. She was a pretty good specimen of Israelitish beauty, tall and slender, and in the full maturity of womanhood. She dressed with some taste, although richly, and with a little of her national fondness for jewelry. Going downstairs, I was aware that Mr. Covert, from the inside, shut the door and locked it. Our dinner was eaten with much approval, and not a little mirth. We had some sparkling cider, which Nathaniel declared made him feel quite young again. Wigglesworth brightened up too, and offered a toast, wishing that I might have the very best luck the law could offer. "That," said Nat, "would be to hold on where you are, and never put your foot in Covert's office again. For, if you want to know this child's opinion about him, it is just—" But the boy stopped himself suddenly, and in a few moments we adjourned. In the next chapter, I shall fill up the blank Nat left, and also tell how I got along at the law. That was Chapter 4 of Life and Adventures of Jack Engle, an Auto-Biography, in which the reader will find some familiar characters. By Walt Whitman. Read by Frank Blissett.